we talked about the root of the sin and the original story behind the motivation and process of the fall. Now we're going to go into the consequences of the fall on human society. There's two main consequences. One is that sin has now entered the world and has been perpetuating. And the second is that we've inherited these fallen natures from Satan. So we're going to go into that in some detail. So here's a quote: Satan cannot perpetuate his evil activity unless he first finds an object partner with whom he can form a common base and engage in give and take action. This is an important point because it shows that we are still, although we have evil influences, we are still subject. We can still choose to engage in good or evil, and it's by Satan actually needs people to engage with Satan in order to have give and take action and engage in evil actions. Now that influence is very strong. In Romans 8:19, Paul laments, "What I do is not the good I want to do. No, the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing." And this goes back to the introduction of the principle and the beginning of the fall section, is that we want to do good, but we have these tendencies to continue to do evil. And this has a real effect on humanity. So sin, what is sin? So the definition according to the principle is that sin is a violation of heavenly law, which is committed when a person forms a common base with Satan, thus setting a condition for give and take action with him. Okay, I'm going to read that again. Sin is a violation of heavenly law. So anytime you go outside of the universal principles, the four-position foundation centered on God and give and take action centered on God, anytime you violate this heavenly law, that's a sin. And this is committed when a person forms a common base with Satan, thus setting a condition for give and take action with him. So when we have a common base with Satan or evil or satanic activities, then this is what allows energy to be created and for us to commit sin. So there's four types of sin, according to the principle. There's the original sin. This is what we had covered already. This is what humanity has inherited from the very beginning. This kind of perpetual stain or foundational element of false love, of self-centered, immature love, being the root of our relationships that we inherited throughout history. This is original sin. Collective sin is really that your culture, your nation, your kind of ethnicity, any sin that was committed based on any peoples that you associated in the past, this is actually collective sin. Hereditary sin is things that are part of your direct lineage. So your parents, your grandparents, your ancestry, any sins that were committed in your lineage, that's hereditary sin. And individual sin is the sins that you commit yourself. So the reason why we explain it this way is not to just overwhelm you with all the sin that exists, which actually can feel overwhelming, but it's to show that even when we commit our sins, the reason why it's so difficult is because there's such a long history and a culture of sin that we're standing upon in terms of our foundation, our fruit, our culture, our traditions even. All of that is connected to our personal sin. So that's how difficult it is to root out sin, because it's so much so much has been embedded throughout history. So this is it's a very challenging, but it's important to understand that that's why it's so difficult. As Paul was lamenting, what I do is not the good I want to do. No, the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. This is kind of the state of humanity. It's no wonder why there's so much evil and sin in the world, is because it's so deeply rooted. More specifically, we've inherited, due to the fall, we inherited from our ancestors their fallen nature. Even we can go back all the way to the Archangel Lucifer, we inherited this same fallen nature. And there's 4 primary characteristics. The first is to fail to see from God's viewpoint. Second, leaving one's proper position. Third, reversal of dominion. And fourth, multiplying evil. So this is kind of the 4 fallen natures that we've inherited from the very beginning. So from the very beginning, the Archangel Lucifer was not able to see Adam and Eve from God's viewpoint. If he was able to see God's love for Adam and Eve and love Adam and Eve as God does, then he could have prevented himself from the rest of the, what happened at the time of the fall. But after he felt a lack of love, Lucifer didn't love Adam and Eve or see Adam and Eve from God's viewpoint. So that's the first fallen nature, is failing to see from God's viewpoint. Second is leaving one's proper position. Lucifer was meant to be the channel of God's love to the angelic world, or kind of the spiritual servant world. That was his position. That was his responsibility. He was also supposed to guide and advise Adam and Eve as an advisor. But instead, Lucifer desired to be in the same position of love as a child of God. So he tried to be in the position of Adam and Eve, even though he was meant to be an advisor and a servant of God. So that's leaving his proper position. Reversing dominion. Adam and Eve were created as the lords of creation. And of course, they were born immature and as children, but they were supposed to mature, and Lucifer was designed to serve not just God and creation, but to serve Adam and Eve as a servant. That was the proper position. But instead, Lucifer, through seducing Eve and indirectly seducing Adam, he reversed the dominion. Instead of Adam and Eve being the lords of creation, he took that position for himself and dominated Adam and Eve. And multiplying evil, as you know, all of these feelings that he had in his heart, a lack of love, jealousy, guilt, all those things he multiplied when he engaged in the illicit sexual relationship with Eve. He multiplied that sin to Eve. And then indirectly, since Eve seduced Adam, she multiplied that sin to Adam. And so this was the multiplication of evil. So we can see that from the very beginning, the same fallen natures that the Archangel Lucifer practiced or had at the very beginning, humanity through Eve and Adam has inherited these same fallen natures and passed it down throughout history all the way to the current day, to us. That's the connection. This is not just theory or a story in the Bible. This is a truth that, when understood, you can see the impact of this story on today's world. So at the very end of this program, we're going to do some application of principle. So we'll have a chance to explore this in our own lives. But in the meantime, we're going to address one more question in the principle. And that is, Why did God not intervene? This is such an important question. If this was a source of evil and turmoil and suffering in the world, why didn't God just stop it from the very beginning? Right? He's all-knowing, so he knew that this was possible. Why didn't God stop it? So according to the principle, there are 3 reasons. Now, the 3 reasons are all kind of interconnected, but they kind of highlight 3 key points. So I'm going to just quickly go over them. First is to maintain absoluteness and perfection of principle. So the main point here is that when God created, he gave Adam and Eve a special power. He gave them responsibility. No other creation has responsibility. Everything in creation, boom, automatically, as long as you have all the nutrients, they grow according to principle. Human beings were the only ones where they had to personally take responsibility to grow themselves spiritually. By doing that, and by Adam and Eve and us being able to fulfill that, that gives us the right to be lords of creation because of our own choice of fulfilling our responsibility. And so God couldn't intervene because Adam and Eve were still in an immature state. And so according to the principle, he wasn't supposed to relate. That was the freedom and responsibility he gave Adam and Eve to fulfill. So he couldn't intervene or do their job for them. Okay? If God were to interfere during this growing period, then it would have ignored the human portion of responsibility, and that would disregard his own principle. Second reason, so God alone be the creator. So God is a God of goodness, and anything that he does, it's implemented as an eternal truth. So God couldn't actually interact with anything that was unprincipled, because once he interacts and makes a change or affects it, then he kind of gives it God's divine authority to that action. So if he would have intervened at the time of the fall, Satan would now stand as the creator of all the fruits of the fall. Basically, he would legitimize Satan by intervening in the fall as a co-creator. But he's meant to be just a servant, a created being. So he couldn't intervene and give that acknowledgement or recognition that he is a co-creator as well, a co-creating evil. This is a deviation of principle, but it's not a new creation that Satan created. Again, this may seem very nitpicky or theoretical, but anyway, maybe we'll leave it at that. And then finally, God wanted to make Adam and Eve the lords of creation. I mentioned this earlier, but if God were to, basically order Adam and Eve and say, nope, don't do that, you can't do that, and put them in a cage until they grow up, then they would not have the right to be lords of creation anymore. So he really, as painful as it was to see them fail, he still believed in the potential of Adam and Eve to eventually, for humanity to eventually, of their own will, fulfill their portion of responsibility correctly and stand as true lords of creation that can relate with God as their sons and daughters. So God is hoping that we will eventually get there where we can relate to God as true sons and daughters. But in order to do that, he had to honor our portion of responsibility. Therefore, he didn't intervene because he wanted to respect and help us hold on to that potential of being lords of creation. So yeah, God had to restrain himself from intervening in the immature acts of human beings. Okay, so we are going to go into the application, how this affects us. So here are some examples of fallen nature's expression in the world today. Failing to see from God's viewpoint, some examples of that is really blaming situations, arguing with other people and not really seeing them from their true potential, right? Or not even seeing yourself from God's viewpoint. That's all under failing to see from God's viewpoint. You know, many times we slip into this. We're not able to see God, maintain God's perspective on situations around us and even upon ourselves and our relationships. Leaving proper position, this is whenever you abuse your authority, okay, or engage in lies or promise something, but you're thinking something else, being bribed, even though you're supposed to be just, but you lean towards the money, or even in business deals, you through money instead of proper relations and value that you provide your customers, you you engage in dealings. That's leaving your proper position in a principled manner. Reversal of dominion is, things like criticizing your boss or taking over their role. This is a picture of kids stealing the attention of the whole classroom and basically taking dominion from the teacher. The bottom left is, again, in many times in love triangles, when you are taking the love of someone else that's not rightfully yours, that's also a reversal of dominion. And multiplying evil, some examples of that is gossiping, also bullying. Bullying, and many times it's when you, even if you're not the person doing the bullying, usually there's a group of people that are doing the bullying, and they're just as bad because you're actually multiplying it by being supporting or being a bystander and watching while someone else is being bullied. Also, negative peer pressure to engage in acts like drinking, smoking. This is multiplying evil. Also, rioting. This kind of mob violence is also an example of multiplying evil.